Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining. So in this session, we are going to cover ATP Database Operations. So before going to start, let me discuss about the previous session. So in yesterday's session, we covered a few points. In yesterday's session, we learned that how we can create ATP connection in Oracle integration so that we can make a connectivity between database and Oracle integration. We created integration where we inserted data into the table. We learned that BI report operations, like where we call the BI report and whatever data we are receiving from the report, we are inserting the data into the table. We learned that how we can send BI report data over email. Yes, in future, when we will learn about the SFTP, we will see that how we can push the report data over SFTP server. And here, if you remember, yesterday's session only, we learned how we can convert the report output format into file reference with the help of opaque schema. So we'll learn about all these things about opaque schema, how it is going to convert the base64 code into actual file reference. And yes, we learn about the stage file, read file in segment operations so that whenever we have the large or bulk data, we can read the bulk data with the help of read file in segment. Now in this session, we are going to cover ATP different operations. Like we have mostly three operations in ATP database. The first is perform operations on table. Under the first operation, we have operations like inserting data, and selecting data from database, updating data, and we have the merge operation. Now we have run SQL statement where we can write SQL queries, and based on the SQL query, we can get the desired result. And in last, we have call SQL procedure where we will be able to call the PL/SQL package, and based on the PL/SQL package functionalities, we can get the data and we can pass the data to PL/SQL package. So let's begin. So here, if you remember, yes, in the last session we created integration. That integration is calling BI report and whatever data it's receiving from the report response, the swap call response, converting into actual file reference with the help of OPK schema. Then we added a stage file read operation to read the data, whatever data we will have, and the same data we inserted into the table. And once we're done with that, we given the mapping of response as success and all. So now here you can see in the ATP operation we used insert operation. We use insert operation to insert data into the table. But yes, we have different operations like update and insert or update and select. So for using that update and insert or update, we require that table, whatever table we select here, that table have minimum one column as a primary key. It's mandatory to have the column primary key. So right now, if suppose I am going to select, let me make a copy of this integration. So right now what we are going to do is that here we have the table. In this table, we have already few data, right? Here you can see the data based on the invoice ID. And we know that the invoice ID is unique for each and every record, right? So what we will do, we will add a invoice ID as a primary key. And based on that, we will update the dates. We will update the details. So let's see that how we can use update and the merge operation. For that, here you can see we have the instance ID. So we will update the instance ID if we are getting the same data again and again. Right here you can see we have instance ID, right? That the previous instance ID. Let me add this one. And here I have to make this column as primary key. So instead of that, let me just drop this table. Drop table. And here this is we have the let me add one more column, that last updated date. Last updated date at varchar 2 so that whenever we will try to update the record, we will update the last updated date column. And here you can see we have the invoice ID. And in invoice ID, we are going to make as primary key. Primary key and everything is fine. Source, instance ID, all is done. Here we have created the table. So right now we don't have any records. So let me move to the integration part. So this is not the integration. We use read in segment one. So I will make a copy of the segment one only. So read data in segment. So I will make a clone of this one. Data in segment. and state data. Yeah, here you can see we added the logic. We added the logic to add the sequence in the instance ID by reading in segment operations, right? So here we added the table, but if you remember the table we updated right now. So if we updated the table, and if you will move to the mapping, in the mapping you will not find the table. You will not find the same column that we updated. For that we need to change the endpoint again. Here you can see in the mapping we don't have extra columns which we added. So these all are the columns previously we have in the table. So as we updated the structure of the table, so we have the two options. The first option, we can delete this endpoint, and again we can add the endpoint so that we will have all the column. Else we will select the again the table. So here in insert operation only right now. So here you can see we have option that remove and add. So I will go for add, and I will select the same table again so that it can sync the table based from the database only. Now here our schema was box and the table XX percentage search here. Yes, drag here. Okay. Instance is a bit slow, that's why it's taking time to move forward. And now here you can see the same table is reflecting here. It means that this time it will be synced. Go next and done. And done. So here we are going to perform insert operation so that the first time the data will be inserted, and next time we will see that how we will use that update and the merge operation. Here you can see once we update it, we will go to the mapping. Mapping, you can see we have the extra column. We have the last updated date, and you can see the invoice ID as a primary key, as we have the star icon here. So now last updated date, again we will drag the current date as a last updated date. So now we are done with the providing all the values, and we'll run the integration and we'll check first. Okay, we have this one warning because of that read file in segment, so we'll skip that one and we'll try to activate this integration. This one. With data have to activate. So now here we have to run the integration. While running the integration, we have to pass the directory report directory. So I have already make a note of the report directory here. We'll copy and we'll pass here. Now test. So again, once we will submit, the integration will be completed and it will get the data from report, and the same data will be inserted into the table. Now here you can see we are successfully able to insert the data. How we have, you can see we have the iteration. That operation is for the read in segment operation. You can see read in segment stage. We given the name to the stage file operation, and based on the segment, we successfully able to insert the data into the table. And if you will see here, this is our table. And once I will query the table, you can see the table having the same data, right? But suppose we are again calling the same report, and sometimes suppose that report is returning the same data. The once the integration report will return the same data. Here you can see the instance ID. The instance ID is 5040012. You can see 120_1 and the underscore 2. 2 is for the second segment run. Okay, and these all are the columns. So creation date, and the last updation date will be same as right now we are first inserting the data. And suppose if we will try to insert the data again or try to run the data again, run the integration again, we will get error. Let me show you the error. And here you can see we are getting the error. Why we are getting the error? Because when we call the BI
Primary
report, yeah, want to say anything? Hello? Okay. So when we call the report, that report send us same data. And when we try to insert the same record again, it's showing error. Why? Because in the table, we added the invoice ID as a primary key so that we cannot insert the same record again and again. That's why for preventing that one, we have the merge operation. So it will be really difficult for us to identify that the record is present in the table or not. And even if that not difficult, then we have to add additional logic to identify that a specific record is available in the table or not. For that, we need to add the logic to check that the specific data is present in the system or not, right? So preventing that one, we have the operations as merge operation, that up insert. You can say insert or update. So what this insert or update will do, it will check the integration, it will run the integration, and whatever data we are going to pass based on the primary key, that specific primary key it will first search in the table. If that primary key present in the table, it will update the record. If that primary key is not present in the table, it will insert the record. Right. So again here I am going to select the schema as box and the table XX percentage. Let me search. And here we'll go next and import table. And next, and done. So here you can see we just change the operation and insert or update. We have the same table, everything is the same. And we'll click on update. So now here you can see if we will move to the mapping, this time based on the primary key, we have in the table as invoice ID. Here you can see based on this ID only, it will check if the data which is coming from the read in segment and we are going to insert is already present. Instead of inserting the data, it will use the update command, and in the update it will update all these things, right? All the values, whatever value we will have here. And if the data is not present in the table, it will insert the record. So let me validate here and close, save and close. And here if you will see, here we have total number of record, how much? 349. We have total 349 records, right? So let me, what we are going to do is that all the record which is available in the second iteration, right? Let us delete the record and then we'll check it's inserting or not. So here we will use delete from table the answer. Now here you can see 149 record deleted, and if we will query the table, we won't have the specific details. You can see we don't have the record for instance ID 2, and all the invoices which is invoice ID which map with the second iteration, that will insert, and the rest of the things will be updated here. So now here you can see, let me save this output so that we can compare. And now done. So now here done, we have to run this into. In body, we have already the pass the request payload. That's done. Click on test. So integration completed. Let's wait for the login. As I told you that for the activity stream log message, it can take some time to load the log message. And now you can see integration completed successfully and we don't have any error. Why we don't have any error? We use the merge operation. Merge operation allow us to insert the duplicate, insert the record which is not present in the table and update the record which is already present in the table. So here if you will see the database, we have the table, we have the invoice ID. For example, taken invoice ID 23. That invoice ID 23 is already present in the table, and the you can see the instance ID which is having as 120_1. And if I will run the integration, execute the table, you can see the invoice ID 23. Now it's changed the invoice ID as to 22_1 instance ID. Why it's changed? Because we pass the same data again. And here you can see the creation created by will be, you will see here, here you can see previously we have created by as previously we have created by as 470176, and here you can see we have created by as 5315,834, and the last updated as we are passing the same value, so last update will be same. And now if you will see, we remove the record having the _2 in the second chunk, and if you will see this time the instance ID, here you can see the instance ID 1 and the rest of the instance ID we have 2. And the this record is inserted and the previous record which is already present in the table, that records updated. So this is the way we can use insert and update operation, that is merge operation in the from the integration only. Now here we are going to create the integration. That integration will get the data from the table, will read the data from this table, and whatever data is present here, based on the data it will generate a file, generate a CSV file, right? So how we can achieve that one? So let's move. So before going to create the file, we require file structure, right? So here you can see in the data, whatever data we are getting, we have all the columns, right? We have the columns and we have already the file structure, sample file we created with this name, that the report data CSV sample. And if you will see, we have the rest, we have all the columns, right? Here we have the columns. So here let me add one more column, add instance ID. Instance ID, and here in instance ID we will provide the instance ID whatever we have the integration instance ID. So let me save this one again, save as 2. So now we save the sample file. Let me move to the integration, and here we have to create new integration again. So right now I'm going to select schedule integration, select, I will give the name as XX get ATP data 01, create. Now we added the endpoint and we have to add the endpoint to get the data from database table. So for that we have to add the ATP endpoint. So I will select XX ATP database we created. So we'll select our database. Now here we have to give the name as we are going to perform operations what operations we are going to perform? We are going to perform operation as select operation, right? So that we can get the data. So I will use select. I will give the name as select ATP, select ATP. Next, and here we have to select the table. For which table we want to get the data? So we'll select the data as box. Then we'll select the table from here and import. Next. And here you can see we have the table name and the query, whatever query they executed based on that, they executed the query something like that. You can see select all the columns from this table. So done and done. So now we added the endpoint. It will get all the data from the table, the specific table. Even if we require to add some validation like we have to get some specific data only, we can add the validation here. We have the option to do the validations like adding the filter condition and all. So right now we are just going to get all the data from there. Here you can see we have the review parent table database. We have the review filter column. So even we can change the columns. So right now, once we selected the select statement, it will select all the columns from the table. And yes, sometimes if you require, we don't want to get that specific column and all, we can untick from here. So here, suppose if I don't want to get the creation date, I don't want to get the created by, I don't want to get the last updated by, I just want all the details. We can't put at empty as invoice ID as its primary key, and the rest of the details will be fine. Okay. So based on that, we can restrict the column, and yes, we have the review and edit SQL queries that where we can add the filters, we can add the restriction logic here. So based on that, which columns, which kind of record we want and all, so that kind of things we can add here. So adding that one here, you can see we have two options that we can go for the edit SQL or we can go for the edit using expression builder. And you can see all the the columns which we remove in the previous step that is not available here. You can see we have the only invoice ID, vendor ID, invoice date, source only, and instance ID. We don't have created date creation by and all. So here if you will see the edit SQL editor, it will list you here, and even we can add the parameters here. So suppose I want to list down all the records having the instance ID as p_1, something like that. This one, the instance ID we will pass as a parameters. For example, the instance ID we have this one, right? So what we can do here, we have to add the validation from this one, where I will copy this one, instance ID is equals to, and here we have to provide the parameters name. That run parameters we will provide at runtime. So that we have to create the parameter first here. So I will let me create the parameters here. Let me write parameter as instance ID. Okay. And then this instance ID parameters we can use here, same as we are using in the uh, notification. So here we will use this P I ID and here hash. Let me check that hash will. So now even we have the another option, we can go for the edit using expression builder, and the same whatever we done using the query, we can do the same here also, and directly you can see we add. So as that time we added one parameters, and that parameters we added in our query, and you can see we have the same parameters here. Now okay, and done. We have option for okay. and next.
And Jeffrey,
Hmm.
do we need to insertion time also? We are going to filter here only.
Which time?
I mean, during insertion time, some data
Yes.
which is coming from there.
Yeah, yes, we can do the filter even at the time of insertion. Sometimes we require to insert the sequence values for a
Hmm.
specific primary key, and also we can just select the sequence value over there also. Yeah. So here you can see as we updated this endpoint, we don't have the mapper here. Mapper is removed, right? So what we can do, we can drag the mapper here. So you can see our endpoint name is select ATP. So as we have only one endpoint, mapper will automatically add with this select ATP endpoint. And here you can see as we added one parameter, so we have to provide the parameters here. So right now we don't have any specific parameters, so we can pass the hard-coded value as, or we can add the rest, add the parameters in the scheduled integration only. So here let me add one parameters, and here we are going to add parameters of p underscore trans id, and the default value let me put as 0. Here we added one parameter, the same parameter we will map here. So the same parameters we map here so that whatever data we will receive as a request parameter of the schedule integration, the same we map to the ATP. And now here we have the data, and based on this data, we have to create the file. For creating the file, we require a stage operation. So I will use this stage operation here, stage file. And as we are going to create the file, it means we are going to use write operation. So I will give the name as write stage. Next, we have to create the file. So I will use write stage, write file. And here we have to specify the file name, what kind of file name we want to give, and specify the output directory. So here the file name I want to give. So whatever instance ID as a parameter we are getting, I want to concatenate that instance ID into file. I will use concat invoice file underscore. I want to concatenate the instance ID. So I will drag this instance ID here and .csv. So this is my file name. Let me save. You can see the file name will be invoice file underscore instance ID.csv. Close. And now here this is the directory OIC virtual directory where we have to create the file. So I will give the directory as temp only. Save. Okay. Close. Now here with the help of these two, our file will be created on this specific directory with this name. Now next. Here we have to select the schema. I want to select the schema as CSV only as we created the CSV schema. So I will select the CSV file. We created the two. Give the name as RS for the record set. And here you can see we added one extra column, that instance ID. That instance ID reflecting here. Now go to next and done. So we added the state endpoint to create the file. We have to provide the mapping. So if you will see in the mapping, whatever data we will provide based on that specific data, that will create the file. But remember, our header row is also a data. So we have, for add the header row, what we will do, I will make a copy of this node. So this, you can see this node is repeating twice. The first, here we will hard code the value as a header, and the second we will map from the endpoint. So here I will provide the hard coded value as an instance ID. So whatever we have, so I will just copy the column name from here only. The ID. Voice state source and the instance ID. So now we are done with the header, providing the mapping of header. It's done. Now we have to provide the value for the data. So for value for the data, we are getting from the select ATP response. So I will expand that one, and here you can see we have record and record set value. This one. So I will map this with the array element, and we will map the single values with the single values only. In today's session, we will cover the FTP server, that how we can place the file over server, how can we can read the data file from server, and then day after tomorrow, we will cover the API calls, like creating the invoice using REST API or the SOAP API transaction and all. Close. Successfully, we created the file, and now this file we want to send over the email. For sending the file over email, we need to add notification here. So I will give the name as email notification, create, and here we have to provide the details. So from where this email will trigger, this email will trigger with no reply at oracle.com, validate, close, to I want to send to myself, and here we have to provide the subject. The subject I will provide the invoice file from ATP database. Vale, close, setting is fine, test file. And here we have to provide the attachment as a file reference. Remember, in the attachment, we can only provide the file reference, nothing else. So here you can see we have the file reference coming from the right stage only. We can directly pass the file reference here. But let me create a zip file of that file, then we will pass that zip file. So now for creating the zip file, again we have to select the stage file operation. And in the stage file operation, we have the option to create the zip file. So here we are going to use zip stage. Next. And here you can see we have option that zip file. We'll select the zip file here. And here we have to provide the zip file name. What will be the zip file name? I will give the name as employee, sorry, invoice file. Invoice file dot zip. Save. Remember, while creating the file, we have to provide the schema, the structure of the file, or we can say the file format of the file. So as this is zip file, so I just provided zip. Here you can see specify the directory to zip, from where we have to get the file to make a zip. So here we created the file in the temp directory, so we provided the temp. So I will provide the same temp directory so that the file created in the temp directory that will be picked. And here you can say specify the output directory from where we have to create this zip file. We have to place the zip file. I want to place the zip file in the zip directory. Save and close. So now it will pick all the file present in the temp directory and it will make a zip with this name or place the zip file over this directory only. Next and done. Here you can see in zip file we don't have mapper as we provided all the information while configuration only, and in the email we will provide the zip file reference. So here the mapping, and we'll search for zip file, and you can see we have the zip stage. Once we will expand this one, ICS, inside the ICS we have the file reference. I will drag this file reference here. Close. So now we added the file reference, zip file reference, everything is done, validate and close. We have one error because of the tracing variable we have to enable for each and every integration. So I will drag this start time as a tracing variable or the instance ID. So let me drag the instance ID here only. Save, save again, close. Now here we have to activate. We activated the integration. So now once the integration will be activated, we will be able to run the integration. So as this is scheduled integration, we can run or execute this integration as ad hoc basis. So here just go and submit now. And yes, confirm. And here it will ask to provide the parameters. Here you can see we have the parameters and we have to provide the values to this parameter. So what value we have? Suppose this is our parameters, instance ID, fine, and submit. So once we will submit, that integration will be executed. And if you will see the track message here, you can see it's in progress only. Will take little bit of time to complete. Here you can see integration succeeded. And yes, if you will see the log message, you can see the select ATP. This select ATP, what it's returning? It's returning the data, whatever data we have in the table based on the validation base. And okay, this is the parameters we pass to this API endpoint. The message sent. Let me refresh again so that we can see the message received from the endpoint. And here you can see select ATP, message sent, the parameters value we pass, and message received, the response of this endpoint. In the response, you can see we have the data, and all the data we have only for the instance ID underscore one only, as we passed as a parameters. And suppose while running the integration, if we pass the parameters here while submitting the integration, if we pass the value as 2, it will also send the same file, the second records, all the records having the same id at underscore 2. Now here you can see, we'll see the log message. We pass the underscore 2 as a parameters to this endpoint, underscore 2 as a parameters, and if we'll see the log message, and in the received message we can see we have only the underscore 2 values. And what it's had done, whatever data it's received, we created the file with the help of write stage, and we passed the same data, we created the file, then after we added the zip operation and created the zip file, and the same zip file we send over the email. So let me show you the email. Here you can see, let me refresh the email, and we got the email, and the email we have the zip file, you can see invoice file dot zip. And if we download the zip file, so let me download the zip file on desktop only. We downloaded the zip file and we will open the zip file. You can see that zip file having the same data. Here you can see this is the invoice zip file, and this file zip file having the CSV file, and the name of the CSV file you can see 504000122 underscore 1. 122 is the instance ID. And if you will move to the integration, you can see previous instance ID, that one that we passed as here, right? And if you will see the second zip file, the second zip file having the data as a 22 underscore 2. So this is the simple integration where we learn how to create zip file and how to get data from the database, ATP database table. And now here we are going to call the PL/SQL procedure. So what we can do is that, so we are going to create one procedure. That procedure we will pass as a parameter as the instance ID, and that procedure will return the record for the specific invoice ID only. Let me create one parameter as invoice ID. So let us create one package, or we can directly create the procedure. So let me create procedure directly. Create or replace procedure. Let me give the name as XX get voice details, and we are going to give parameters as p underscore voice id. Invoice id paragraph 2, and this procedure is going to return as value as, suppose how many values we have there in the table. So suppose it's going to return back the invoice id and the invoice number and the invoice amount. Suppose these two value we are going to receive from the table. So invoice id, let me add here as a and this, sorry. So as this is the parameters we will get, so we added in here, and the rest of the parameters we will add as out. So as we have invoice ID already there, so we don't want to pass, we will pass the vendor ID out bracket 2 invoice number, invoice amount, invoice date, and the source. And suppose we want to return one more column, that's the fetch date. FETCH, the fetch date. That's good date. And here again we will provide the date as varchar 2. Now we are done with that. As let me create one variable LG. So here whatever parameters user provides as a p invoice ID as a in and out parameters define that procedure is going to return back all these values. So we will get the data from the table based on the invoice ID and we will return all these values. So here what we are going to do is that we are going to write an SQL query to get the data. So select vendor ID, invoice number, invoice amount, invoice amount, invoice date, source, and the fetch date we will pass as a system date. So we'll use to date char this date and we'll convert 6 date into the format YYY DD HH24 MI. Select this one into, and we want to pass. So let me change the variable name as p vendor ID to p underscore vendor ID so that it can be differentiate between the table column and the parameters value. So now we have again passed all these values so that whatever data we will fetch using this query, the same data will be inserted into this variable. First date, source, the gfetch date. Gfetch date done. From where we want to get the data? We want to get data from this table only. This table. So once this package will be completed, what it will do, this package will insert the record into this variable, right? So here we created the procedure. Let me check where is there a p fetch state not be used or get a state. Okay. Okay, so here we have to pass the date. number we have done. This will be out type. So now here you can see we are successfully able to create the procedure. The same procedure we will use in the PLS in the Oracle integration. So we have the procedure, and what is the schema of this procedure? So for checking the schema again, we will go select a star from all objects where object name is equals to our procedure name. And you can see that our schema is Fox. So we can directly access this procedure. So now for accessing the procedure, we have to create integration
think,
again.
I think you have to put where invoice ID equal to P invoice ID.
Okay, sorry, yes, we forgot to add the validation. So here, where the invoice ID, we have the column in the table with the name invoice ID is equals to the parameters invoice ID we are getting as a parameters. Now done. Even we can check this procedure also for checking the procedure. So before going to, I suggest that before going to use the procedure in integration, you can validate that procedure. And how you can validate the procedure? By executing this procedure by your own. So how we can do that one? So we can declare one block. And as we know that this procedure is going to return value in this variable only, this variable, that's why it's required to have that variable whenever we are going to call. So I will create this variable here. So that we can like validate that yes, our procedure is working perfectly fine. Let me copy all this one. I hope you all are aware about the basic of PLSQL, so that it will not be difficult for you to understand. And yes, most of the time while working on the integration, like there are separate team who is working on PLSQL, and yes, on some project, you have the one only you need to create the PLSQL package and you have to use the package in your integration. So that depends on the project to project. So here we created the procedure and now we have to call the procedure. So we will call the procedure, and that procedure we will have to pass the invoice ID. So here we are going to pass invoice ID as 4046. And once we pass the invoice ID, we have to pass the rest of the variable as we define the variable as out. So here we successfully able to call the package, and after that I want to display the message. So dbms fine. And suppose I want to display only invoice number. So before going to execute, I need to on the set server out on. So now we will be able to see the message, whatever we are going to display here. So here you can see our PLSQL package executed and it's having the error. Okay, no, it's working fine. So here you can see we call the PLSQL package, we pass the parameters as a invoice ID, and based on the invoice ID, it's returning the invoice number. And invoice number you can see 40985. 40985 for the invoice ID 4046. If we will pass the invoice ID this one, it will return back the data as this one. So here if we will pass here, you can see that we have invoice ID. We can see we have invoice ID that 55050 under hyphen invoice, you can see. So the same way we will call this procedure from our Oracle integration. So here let me move to the integration part. Again we will create one integration. Let me create the schedule integration only, and here we will give XX for procedure. That procedure you can, here you can see we directly created the procedure, that independent procedure. You can create procedure inside the package only, and then you can call the package over there. So here let me add the procedure here. So ATP XX ATP database we created, we'll select here and call procedure ATP. Here we have to select that invoke our stored procedure, go next, and after that we have to select the schema and the procedure name. So here you can see we have the select schema, and somewhere we have the schema as Fox, yes. And once we selected the schema, based on that schema, the object will reflect here and we can select the object. So here you can see we have the package and the procedure. So right now you can see we don't have any package, that's why it's not showing anything. But yes, we have the procedure that access get invoice details. You can see this is the same procedure we have here. Access get invoice details. So now here we will select here and next and done. So as you can see in the procedure, we added the parameters. We added one in parameters and rest of the out parameters here. Sorry, rest of the out parameters. So all the parameters, whatever we added in the procedure, will reflect in the mapping only. So here you can see we have the mapper. Once we will open the mapper, you can see we will able to see the mapping. So we will able to see the P underscore invoice ID. Why we are showing only one endpoint here or one parameters here? Because we have the P invoice ID as in parameters. In matlab, in means we are going to pass this value while calling this one, and this raw rest out, it means that this is the response we are going to get from the procedure. So here in the invoice ID, let me map. So again, let me create one parameters to the schedule endpoint as a invoice ID, P underscore INV underscore ID. By default we will pass 0. It's mandatory to pass by default value. So here we'll map the same parameters, whatever parameters we will get while executing that one. Here validate, close. And now in response we are going to get the output of that one. So that values we can print in the log message, or in the response only we can get in the logger only. So we'll see that in the logger. So here you can see let me map one tracking variable. Save and close. Even if we want, we can print in the log message also. So let me add the logger here. In the logger, voice logger, create. And suppose if you want to print the log message, here you can see concat invoice number. And where is the invoice number? We are getting the invoice number from the response. So here you can see the call procedure ATP. This is the out parameters, and we will expand. You can see we have all the output parameters listed here. Vendor ID, invoice number, P invoice amount, P invoice date, all these things, whatever we have as a out parameter. So suppose we are going to print the invoice number here. We drag here, and now we want to print the invoice amount. Invoice amount. And again, I will drag the amount column here and done. Validate. And it will display the message in the logger as invoice number and the invoice amount. Close. Validate. Close. Save. Close. Validate. So let me deactivate one integration. This is our process integration. We are going to run this integration by activating the first activate. And now we are going to submit this integration as ad hoc basis. So confirm. And here we have to provide the parameters. So let me check the invoice ID, any one of the invoice ID. So somewhere, okay. Here only, suppose we have this invoice ID and based on the invoice ID, it will return this data, right? We are going to pass this invoice ID as a parameter and submit. And if we will move to the logger, here you can see integration completed successfully. Once we will move to the logger, and in the logger we will able to see. So it will take a little bit of time to show the log messages. So we'll refresh again, and here you can see once done in the while calling the procedure, the ATP procedure, what value we are passing? We are passing value as the ID. You can see the instance ID we pass, the invoice ID, and what value we receive and response of this endpoint. Once you will click in the message, you can see the vendor ID, the invoice number, the invoice amount, invoice date, and all these things we are receiving in the mapping only. And here you can see in the log message we print the same logger. That the log message is invoice number, the invoice number, and the invoice amount, the same invoice amount. So this is the way we can execute the PL/SQL package from the integration only. Yes, based on the requirement, we can modify the package. We can create the high level procedure and all. So that kind of things we can do from the integration from the PL/SQL level only. So why we are using the PL/SQL package? So yes, there are sometimes requirement we have to manipulate the data. We have to perform operation on the data before going to process the data. So at the time we are using the procedure. For example, supplier have processed or supplier have uploaded the invoice data in SFTP server. Supplier placed the CSV file. That CSV file contains the invoice data, and we have to load that invoice into Fusion. So what we will do? We will first create the integration. That integration will get the data from server. Then after we have the data in the integration only, and we cannot directly depend on the supplier data, right? They provide the data, and we will confirm that okay, the data is perfectly fine. Let's push into Fusion. It will generate an error. So preventing that error while calling the Fusion API, we pass the data into the into the PL/SQL package, and we insert the data into the PL/SQL ATP table. And based on that PL/SQL, we done the basic validation. What kind of basic validation? Suppose we done the validation for checking the business unit, operating units, and suppose we are just going to validate the suppliers. We have to correct supplier or not. Invoice number. Suppose we are going to generate all these things we are going to generate from PL/SQL package only. Then after, with the help of that PL/SQL procedure or the PL/SQL table, we will get the same data in OIC again. And then based on that data, we will generate the file. We will load the file over UCM, or if we are going to use REST services, so we can directly call the REST services and we will pass the same data in the mapping. So that kind of operation we can perform with the help of database operation. So in next session, we will discuss about the SFTP connectivity, how we can access the file from server and we can place the file from on server. All these things we will get to know in the next session only. Thank you so much for joining. We will meet in next week's session.